So for today's talk, I'm going to be discussing the process of buying an airplane. In particular, I'll be talking about how my friends Todd, Mark, and we bought our airplane and some tips, pointers, advice, and stuff like that. So for starters, my name's Tim Morgan. Just like I introduced myself the last time I did this talk, I'm on the IT tools team. I'm a software engineer here at Square. And for this talk, I'll be talking about the process of buying this airplane, this 2005 Cirrus SR-22 Generation 2, that the previous owner, he really loved Formula One, so he did that to it. And as you can see, it's a pretty well equipped. It's got, turbocharger upgrade. It's got new avionics, fancy autopilot, storm scope, built-in oxygen, all sorts of stuff. Total cost was 270 AMU. Does everybody here know what an AMU is? No. An AMU it's an aviation monetary unit. It's equal to $1,000, and you use it so that when you're discussing prices, you don't depress yourself.
And everything costs minimum one AMU.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So total cost was 270 AMU, $270,000, and we charge ourselves $140 an hour to fly it and $1,000 a month to own it. And what?
Is it 15?
What?
100 a month?
No, I'm not including the loan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and about $1,000 a month to own it, and those pay for all the operating costs as well as sufficient reserves to cover expected and unexpected maintenance. Okay. So this talk is going to be a couple of different sections. The first thing I'm going to talk about is choosing the right aircraft. This is going to be the most hypocritical portion of the talk because I'm going to give you a lot of advice on how to choose the right aircraft, but the reality is for this plane, honestly, one of our mutual friends just linked it to us and said, hey, you should buy this plane, almost like half as a joke. So that's not the correct way to choose the right aircraft. But I will talk a little bit about what I see. And the main thing I see that prevents people from buying a plane is messing up the shopping process. That's, I think, the number one reason why these groups come together, but nobody actually ends up buying a plane. People get overly specific with their needs. They kind of convince themselves they need a certain model or a certain trim level and they can't own anything else. There are an ocean of airplanes out there, and don't get trapped into believing that you need a specific one. And people also assume they can buy the perfect airplane. And trust me, the perfect airplane, new or used, does not exist. 100% does not exist. The vast majority of people somehow become convinced that they need more airplane than they actually need. And so my advice is to abide by what's called the 99% rule, which is select an aircraft that meets 99% of your flights because you're going to pay dearly for the remaining 1%. Like as an example, people will see some airplane like this Piper Meridian on controller.com, and they imagine themselves in the Meridian. They like the feeling. It's pretty cheap. It's only 700 AMU. It's like most Meridians cost like $1.4 million. And so they're like, they convince themselves, oh yeah, this is the step up that I need. But the reality is most of your flights are going to be $100 at hamburgers in Napa, which in a Meridian is a $1,000 hamburger. To really drive the point home, the laws of physics tell us that the power required increases with the square of airspeed. So getting an airplane with double the speed or double the capability will cost on the order of about 4 times as much. And you can see here that, like a fairly cheap Cessna 182 at about 80 AMU will cover about 99% of the flights most of the people in this room are doing. And if you really want to do the step up, just so you can do like that 1% of flights, the really ambitious flights, you're going to pay 5 to 10 times as much. I have a friend who owns a Piper Cherokee. He bought it for $30,000. He loves it. He flies it all the time. He loves to remind people how many Piper Cherokees they could have bought. Whenever these groups of people come up and they start discussing these dream airplanes they can own, he always loves to tell people how many Piper Cherokees they could have bought. For the Cessna 182, you could own about 2.5 Piper Cherokees. For the Meridian, you could own about 26. So you can own a fleet of 26 Cherokees. The other problem that I see people getting trapped in is that they think they can buy something close to what they want and then upgrade the avionics. Trust me, you're not going to upgrade the avionics. It's a real headache. The plane's down for a long time and you're paying money on the plane while it's down. And so the rule of thumb that I like to use is take whatever you think it'll cost and multiply it by 10. So upgrades get really quite pricey quick. You're looking at a plane with a GNS 430. You think, ooh, I could put a GTN in there. That's 15 AMU, plus the cost that the airplane spends on the ground not being flown for like a 2-month upgrade. And then upgrading what our previous owner did, he upgraded this Avenine Integra to a Release 9. That's the cost of a whole other airplane right there. So estimating true costs is hard for a lot of people. You need to basically, to estimate your true costs, you need to bucket your yearly costs, your fixed costs. These are the costs that the airplane incurs whether or not it's flying. And then you need to look at the hourly costs, which are the costs you incur when the airplane is only flying. These are the costs for our airplane, One Mike Alpha, all in. So if I fly 100 hours per year, which is on the high side for a typical renter, most people fly about 70 to 80 hours a year. But if I fly 100 hours a year, that's an equivalent rental cost of about $430 an hour, which is pretty expensive. Most rental planes you will find at flying clubs are like north of 150 an hours. So owning is never going to be cheaper than renting for most people unless you buy like a really bare bones plane, like a 172 or a 152. So, like I said, I did the wrong thing and went after a specific plane, but most people shop websites like controller.com or tradeaplane.com. They look for an interesting deal. And I just wanted to tell you about some important terms that you should know when you're shopping. These are some terms you'll find in the ads. TSN is time since new. That's since the engine was built. And TSO or SMOH, that's time since the last major overhaul. Engines have to be overhauled regularly, about every 2,000 hours or so. Overhauls are very expensive. They basically involve tearing down the engine and rebuilding it to spec. Aircraft that are close to being due for overhaul are typically much, much cheaper because they factor in the $20,000, $30,000 overhaul and the cost as a discount. And as a private pilot, you do not have to overhaul your engine. You can run it, you can prefer to repair on condition and just let the thing run until something fails. Generally, when something fails, the plane's not going to fall out of the sky, like a fuel pump or fail and something, and you just use the other one. And so you could do that. But that being said, if an airplane is close to overhaul, you'll typically see costs go way down as it gets closer to overhaul. You should also pay attention to TTAF as well, total time airframe. Airplanes with high TTAFs have been flown a lot. So they're typically wearier. They might have more problems. Okay, so let's talk about the purchase process now. And that all starts with the pre-buy. So the pre-buy is when you inspect the aircraft and you come to an agreement with the seller to purchase it, if you like it. So step one for the pre-buy is to meet the aircraft. So typically the seller will, typically the seller is going to offer you a demo flight and they'll talk up the aircraft and give you a walk around. You can ask the seller questions to get a sense of how flexible they are on price. That was a big learning point for me. Why I kind of rolled into this kind of guns loaded, like for a car, like a car negotiation. I was all like ready to be like, nah. But I learned that the seller was really passionate about the plane and price was not nearly as important to him as location and just making sure that the plane went into good hands. And so it's important to learn about what motivates your seller so you know like where the negotiation points are and like what's important to the seller. You don't have to inspect every nut and bolt of the airplane. You don't have to do the world's, like most detailed pre-flight. We'll talk about the inspection later. All you really got to do is just fly the plane, see if you like it, see if it's something that you could see yourself buying. Step two of the pre-buy is to pour over the logbooks. At some point, the seller is going to send you the logbooks, probably digital copies of them. There are three: the engine logs, the airframe logs, and the propeller logs. This is your chance to get to know the total history of the airplane. Since most airplanes have their entire logbook history intact from the day they were built, and in fact, if they don't, I would strongly consider not buying that airplane. You want to read every single page. For us, the three of us, we split the logbooks in three essentially, and we went through in thirds. And you really learn about the total history of the airplane, like all the different people who've owned it, what they did with it, the operations they ran.
About how much time did you spend per logbook or total person hours on that process?
Just a couple hours really, because I think we had each like about 200 pages each or so to go through. And you kind of just, you don't have to like read everything. Like most of these words you might not even know. And then you just have to just look for anything really suspicious, like propeller strike or stuff like that. And so you want to look out for just major events or suspicious damage, or gaps in the logbook would also be important.
But by the same token, it's not going to say propeller strike in the logbook. It's going to be like some language that dances around that phrase.
Yeah.
And you got to read between the lines a little bit to see what actually happened.
So step three is to decide if you like the airplane. And if you do, to make an offer. The offer is not a binding agreement. You can always back out of the offer. So you're not, by making the offer, you're not sealing your fate. But you do have to, at some point, tell the seller that you're serious and you'd like to buy it. Now, if the seller is our seller, Alex, he's going to be a jerk and he's going to tell you that, like, unfortunately, the news is not good, but instead it's actually great. Barely.
Sorry, I just had to know, what was the 22 cents for?
We were trying to appeal to his love of the number 22 because if
Really?
yeah, as you see on there, that's the number of the airplane that he wrote on the tail, like the yeah. We were trying to appeal to his sensibilities. We were doing anything we could to get that plane at that point. So as you can see, he says, "I'm thrilled to let you guys carry the pride and ownership legacy of 171 Mike Alpha." He was very interested in the in sort of like maintaining the legacy of the airplane. Okay, so then the last step of the pre-buy process is to negotiate and sign the purchase agreement. So the purchase agreement, once signed, is what actually kicks off the purchase process. And the purchase agreement is going to be pretty boilerplate. If you go onto the AOPA website, you can find templates for purchase agreements. The seller is going to provide the purchase agreement, probably will be more or less look like that template on the AOPA website. It specifies who pays for what and how the process is going to go down. You can expect the contract to specify who will be handling escrow. You can expect it to require you to make a good faith deposit, maybe like 10, 20 AMU or something like that. And you can expect to have to pay for the pre-buy inspection. What you're going to want to do is obviously have a lawyer look over this and make sure there's nothing weird. If you are actually serious about buying a plane, you should sign up for AOPA pilot protection services right now, along with giving you insurance against like FAA enforcement actions. It also gives you 1 or 2 hours of free aviation lawyer time a year, which you can use to look over your purchase agreement.
Is that the same as like the liability insurance that like Zanet offers, for example?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, pilot protection services I think is unique. I don't know how many other, because it's specifically for enforcement actions and other lawyery things.
It's just legal services. It's like access to an aviation attorney.
Yeah,
kind
like
of
LegalZoom.
affordable-
Yeah, like,
Pretty much.
yeah.
Did you use that?
Oh yes. Yes, he did look over. And one weird thing we found in our purchase agreement that most people don't have is that our seller insisted on a right of first refusal. So if we wanted to resell the plane, he wanted the opportunity to take it back before we were able to resell it to anyone else.
Oh wow.
Yeah, which the lawyer told us, is invalid because the purchase agreement really only covers the purchase process, and right of first refusal is kind of outside that. It wasn't the appropriate place for it.
So did you have that marked out?
Yeah, we had it marked out. We told him if he wants the right of first refusal, it should be in something else. Yeah, we could talk about it. Okay, so once the purchase agreement is signed, the purchase process begins. You have the opportunity now to get some ducks in a row before the clock starts ticking. You can get your insurance pre-approval. It's just like buying a car. You can get your insurance pre-approval. You can get your loan pre-approval. It's the same thing as buying a car. You submit the paperwork. You submit, like, this is the plane I think I'm going to be buying, and they send you like a pre-approval, some quotes, some stuff like that. You can also schedule the pre-buy inspection in advance. All right, so for the purchase process, step one, escrow starts. So the two of you will have agreed on an escrow agency. The escrow agency is going to take your down payment, and it's going to take the title to the airplane. It's going to hold on to them both. If the process completes successfully, money and airplane change hands. If it doesn't, escrow company just gives back everyone what they originally had. Escrow, usually the clock is 30 days. So once escrow starts, you have 30 days to get everything in order for the sale, or it automatically reverts. So just like buying a house, if anybody's bought a house. Once you're in escrow, you're going to start the pre-buy inspection. It's up to you to either do this or waive it. Obviously, don't waive it, do it. You want to get the aircraft inspected by a mechanic. A lot of people say, oh, we could just do, it's due for an annual. Let's just do the annual as a pre-buy. Don't do that. Mechanics are looking for very different things when they do an annual versus when they do a pre-buy. You want to tell the mechanic this is specifically a pre-buy inspection, and they will do specific pre-buy related things. You want to get the inspection done at a shop that's different from the owner's regular shop, so you have a different pair of eyes looking at the plane than the guys who always look at it. The pre-buy is going to turn up a bunch of discrepancies, like you can see here, just a bunch of little things. For each of these discrepancies, you have a decision to make. You can decide if it's a deal breaker and you want to back out of the sale. You can decide if it's something that you want to just repair later, or if it's something you can just live with. So like in this case, one of the fuel indicators is miscalibrated. We decided to just live with it. It's still miscalibrated to this day. The purchase agreement generally says you have to pay for any issues that you want fixed unless it's an airworthiness issue. If it's an issue that actually would keep the plane from flying, then the seller has to pay for it because the airplane was misrepresented by the seller, because presumably the seller told you this is a plane that flies. So title search comes next, just like with buying a car. The escrow company is going to handle that. They will generally just fax you or PDF you just the results of the title search. Just like with a car, you want to browse through it, make sure there are no gaps and that all the owners are accounted for. And everything lines up.
Well, mostly you want to make sure the seller has the right to sell you the plane.
Yes, that too. And that, yeah, the plane is actually under the seller.
Things can be weird, and they may not actually have that when they think they do.
Most of what you're going to be scrambling to do inside of 30 days, though, is get all your paperwork in order. So if you're getting a loan, you're going to have a mountain of loan documents to sign, just like buying a house. You're going to be constantly getting phone calls from the lender like, oh, actually, we need a copy of this. Oh, wait, we need a copy of that. Oh, wait, we need a copy of this. It's going to be constant. It's going to be right up to the deadline. You need your final insurance binder signed. So that's another one that you'll need. That's another one that they'll be asking you constantly for information. And you need to find a home for your aircraft. A hangar is the best bet. Hangar's hard to find in the Bay Area. Covered tie downs are better. Open tie downs can rot your plane over time if you don't want to use like an airplane cover or window covers. The wait list for like a hangar at San Carlos right now is about 4 years, but the good news is you can get on the list right now if you wanted to, and maybe in sometime in the next 4 years you'll have a plane and you'll be that much further in the list.
Do you know anything about the wait list for tie downs? Is there one, or can tie downs be found pretty immediately?
I think they have plenty of tie downs. The T-shades is a little bit shorter.
Mhm.
But where we ended up, and where I've seen a couple people end up, is the Skyway building.
Yeah,
Where
so
that is.
that's where we ended up. The Skyway buildings where San Carlos Flight Center and West Valley have their offices. That's owned by a private owner, so he can give out hangars basically however he wants. So if you talk to him or whatever, so if you find contacts at different airports, maybe you can kind of circumvent the process of like waiting in line for a hangar owned by the city versus one privately owned.
This is still a mystery to me because we've seen probably like 4 different people move into the Skyway building hangars while we've been there. And like, how was the waiting list 4 years long for the
I don't know.
city hangars?
Honestly, Gene, the guy who owns the Skyway building, kind of just, I think he just puts whatever people he wants in hangars.
Yeah, maybe.
So the final, or one of the last steps, if everything goes correctly and you get all your paperwork done, escrow closes. Everything is going to be signed and faxed to your escrow company before close, and then the escrow company will send you a bill of sale and a registration application. You'll sign those, and the escrow company will send it to the FAA, and the FAA will register the airplane as yours. And you get to keep the bill of sale. The last step is to take the airplane home. And so you'll sign a delivery receipt proving that you took ownership of the aircraft. If the airplane's far away, you might want to hire a ferry pilot to bring it back if you're not comfortable making a long flight in your brand new airplane. Otherwise, you can just get a one-way ticket, pick it up, and fly it back with a CFI or something.
I did my checkout in that plane.
Yeah, that was my very last flight. No, it was not, because we had other issues. But that was supposed to be my very last flight as a renter pilot. Anyway. The other thing I'm going to briefly touch on that, again, this is something you should look to a lawyer for, but if you want to, the United States, the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution says that states are not allowed to charge sales tax for interstate commerce. And so there is a way to avoid paying sales tax if you can prove to the IRS that this was an interstate purchase.
State tax board.
To the state tax board that this was an interstate purchase. It's a process, and you have to have enough legitimate out-of-state business that you can actually use the airplane for interstate commerce. And if you can pull that off, if you do enough trips for business, it's something that you can do. Definitely want to talk to a lawyer for that. There are lawyers who specialize specifically in doing this.
There are also companies that specialize specifically in helping you avoid this sales tax.
I've been told that it's almost impossible to avoid it for California, but if it is avoidable, that's
27 AMUs.
What?
27 AMUs.
Yeah, it's 10% sales tax. It's worth it, but
We did successfully do this, and a lot of people do. So
yeah,
it's pretty common.
it just comes down to if you can, for the first 6 months, if you can make enough out-of-state trips that are what the state tax board considers legitimate out-of-state business. And so,
what's the over and under on how much the plane has to cost before the lawyer is more expensive?
We paid like a $4,000 something for this. I don't remember if it was.
yeah,
a
it's about
percentage of the
40
purchase
grand.
price.
It's about, yeah.
Okay.
But you're also, like, obviously you're making more flights than you would have normally, because flights where you would have just bought a ticket to meet a client or something out of state, you would use your plane instead. even for trips that are very long, so you can rack up the hours, the out-of-state hours. But there's a benefit to that too, because it's incentive for you to fly the plane more, become more familiar with your plane, and become more proficient in it. So it has a positive incentive.
But the
as
trips
well.
out of state have to be in service of some sort of business. Though?
Yes.
It's very loosely defined though.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
So then,
I was gonna say, I'm gonna go to work from Nevada for the week.
so then do you three like personally own the plane, or is there some like shell corporation that owns it?
Welcome to the next section.
Next
So this is the last section. We got about 8 minutes left, so I'm gonna push through this. So if you're a single owner, everything I've described is everything you have to do. If you're buying with friends, you can jointly own the aircraft as individuals, or you can form an LLC to own the aircraft. And the reason why you would do that is twofold. First of all, you can kick people out and add people to the plane without re-registering it every time. Otherwise, you'd have to re-register it with the FAA. And secondly, it gives you a legal framework to resolve disputes and set the rules for how the airplane is used, and who gets to use the plane when. So,
There's also a significant financial advantage for adding or removing partners because you don't have to pay sales tax when you're buying a share in a business, where if you bought a share of a plane, you would have to pay sales tax on that.
yeah.
So future people that come into this won't pay sales tax.
Yeah, so it's called a co-ownership. It's not a partnership, it's a co-ownership because we all completely own the aircraft. We don't own a fraction of the aircraft. For us, there's different ways of structuring it, structuring the scheduling. We use a priority pilot rotation. So 1 week out of 3, each of us is like the owner of the airplane. Essentially, we can do whatever we want with it. And the other people are renters, like they have to put it on the calendar and get approval and stuff. And then the next week you might be the priority pilot, and you can do, and we can trade weeks back and forth. It's a fairly fair way of doing things. So if you want to form an LLC, step 1 is deciding what kind of person you want to own an airplane with. My girlfriend has said many, many times, entering into an airplane co-ownership is like entering into a marriage. You need to consider carefully the disposition of the people that you want to share the airplane with, and you need people that you'll get along with well and that you can weather drama and disputes with. Once you've found your people, you're going to need to choose a registered agent who's going to receive all mail from the state. That's unfortunately me, which means my address is listed in the public register. You need to decide if your LLC will be member managed or manager managed. That I don't even know. Talk to a lawyer. And then the registered agent files the LLC-1, which is the articles of organization, and mails them in. And then you get it back. It's stamped by the state, and then that's the proof that your LLC exists. The other thing you're going to need to do is file an LLC-12, a statement of information. You have to file this within 90 days. You can do this online, and you have to do it every 2 years as well to keep California updated as to the nature of your business. The hardest part is going to be writing the operating agreement, or the OPAG. You will need a lawyer to do this. It will have all the rules of your business, how disputes are resolved, how the airplane is shared, who pays for what, as well as the general LLC rules, like how meetings are done, how officers are elected, that sort of stuff. Everyone's going to want a copy of your OPAG. Your insurance provider is, your lender is, your escrow agent, they're all going to want a copy of your OPAG. So the sooner you get it done, the sooner you'll stop getting phone calls asking for a copy of your OPAG. And you're also going to need to file it with a state, and they'll keep it as proof in case you have a dispute of some kind.
It's a great pen, by the way. Shoot first.
Yeah. So once you get the airplane, you're going to want to buy equipment for it. You'll probably need a lot of the stuff that you're used to just having as a renter. You know, in the back of the plane, they have that nice little box with tie downs, cleaning supplies, covers, a tow bar, containers, tools. You're going to need to buy all that, obviously. You're not going to get that. You'll also need to manage the maintenance state of the airplane. This means keeping track of when annuals are due, when oil changes are due. We use a company called Savvy to help us with this. They're okay, I guess. And they kind of calendar everything for us. Beyond maintenance, you're going to want to take care of your aircraft. That means washing and waxing it regularly according to the maintenance manual, learning how to operate the engine properly, keeping the navigation databases up to date if you do IFR, and flying regularly. An airplane that doesn't fly every 2 weeks or so, the oil tends to collect in the bottom of the cylinders, and it can start damaging the cylinders the next time it's started. So you want to fly it at least every 2 weeks if possible. You're going to need to keep track of taxes and fees so that you can pay them. You're going to want to track your finances to ensure that you have overhead for expected or unexpected maintenance, like overhauls if you're going to be doing overhauls, parachute repacks if you have a Cirrus. And then lastly, you have to take care of LLC stuff. You need to pay registration fees. The state actually requires that you hold regular meetings of the officers. And you have lots of paperwork to do every 2 years and fees to pay. And so as you can see, it's definitely harder and pricier than renting, but it's far more flexible and it can be far more rewarding as well. But it's also always an adventure, and it was a great learning experience as well. Any questions?
Sure. If you want to avoid the heartburn of racing the escrow process, can you buy for cash and then finance after the fact?
You still need escrow, even if you're going to do that, I think. I'm pretty sure, because escrow also covers like,
Still want to do that.
yeah, the seller is going to make a purchase agreement including escrow, so that if anybody has a problem during the process, it can just
What I
revert.
mean is like you can still go through the escrow process, but you don't have to be dealing with the last minute paperwork from the finance company.
True, but you'll probably have to deal with the other stuff, which is insurance and finding a home. But yes, the finance company was a lot of effort, and to take that out would make the process at least a little bit easier for
Okay.
sure.
Cool.
I'm gonna guess the lenders might be a little bit WTF if you're trying to finance a plane you already own.
Okay.
That might confuse them. I don't know.
These are
Is
really
it,
people
would it
do
be more like
houses,
just getting a
so
loan
maybe-
with the plane as collateral once you own it?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, a second mortgage.
Yeah. So I've been flipping through controller.com a lot, and I see a lot of interesting 182s that are not nearby. How do you deal with? It's hard for me to imagine like pursuing a plane that I couldn't go look at and sniff and stuff. When it's far away, do you just make a lot of
Yeah, there's a lot of back and
plane trips to various places in the country?
we only met our seller once during the process, and that was just for the flight, like the
Fortunately,
intro
in
flight.
Walnut Creek.
Yeah, he was in but even if you were in Florida, we would only had to make one trip because we never saw him after that. Like once we got the purchase agreement, the rest was all over the phone.
But I mean, like as far as the information you learned about the plane before buying it, how would you have arranged if it had been in Florida, for example?
So what I would do is ask for the logbooks first, and that'll tell you a lot. And then make sure you vaguely agree on price. I get done everything you can before, but yeah, you want to go.
And then can you remotely deploy a mechanic for the pre-buy inspection, or is
Yes.
that after you go?
Yes,
to it?
and you would
do
have the
pre-buy
seller.
before you fly to Florida to look at it, or after you fly?
I don't think it matters that much. Honestly, the test flight is really just like a thing to just get your heart racing. It's a sales thing, really. We could have gone through the whole process
Yeah.
without the test
You
flight.
should. I mean, you should have good pictures and stuff to know like what condition it's in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many steps did you absolutely require a lawyer for? Like if I were buying a less expensive aircraft, like a $35,000 or $40,000 182 or 172, or like a Grumman, would I need a lawyer at any point?
So
Purchase
Jacob
agreement?
with the Cherokee is probably the counterexample to all this stuff because like he did owner financing. The guy, I guess he knew beforehand somehow, and
Yeah.
the owner financed the airplane to him, so he made it like a couple of years
Yeah.
worth of payments.
I
to
think
the
he
owner.
probably did the whole thing without a lawyer.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like he did it super simple and easy.
Does
He's
he
a
have an
lawyer.
LLC or?
I mean, a lawyer for my LLC, but beyond
Yeah.
that, I don't think I'm going to need.
You will need a lawyer to form the LLC. You can't write an operating agreement yourself. Like
Was the LLC an optional part of your process?
if you are owning it with multiple people, it's strongly recommended so that you don't have to resell the airplane every time you add or remove someone. But if you were just single owning it, I would recommend not having an LLC.
Yeah, I'm doing an LLC as a single owner, just as a liability protection thing. So I'm probably going to, at least for some period of time, let West Valley, lease it back on the West Valley line.
Okay, yeah.
And so that kind of provides a little bit of insulation.
If you're doing the simplest possible thing, you definitely don't need an LLC, and you probably, except for the purchase agreement, probably don't need a lawyer, and can maybe just look at the purchase agreement yourself if you're feeling confident.
How do you feel about 3 people loading? Like, does that feel like a good number? Is that too many, too few?
4 would be tough, honestly. With 3 people, I have exclusive access to the airplane about once a month, which is nice. It's expensive. I mean, we charge ourselves $140 an hour and $1,000 a month, so it's not cheap to own. And so flying it about once a month is probably a reasonable compromise in terms of maintaining common sense finances. And 2 people would definitely be more expensive. Like we'd be charging ourselves a lot more. I think 3 is a pretty decent sweet spot.
Three's a good number, I think.
So it flies pretty much every weekend.
Actually, no. That's why I
Yeah.
think 4 could probably work, at least for us. It's all super dependent on who your people are, right?
Right.
If you get in a group with someone who, like, flying is the only thing they ever do and they want to go every weekend, then it's going to be tough to borrow it from them on their weekend, which we do all the time, like borrow it from each other.
Yeah, when we first bought the plane, Mark was texting us at like 5 a.m. like, hey, I'm just going to go up and do some pattern work before I go to work. Is anybody awake? Anybody need the plane?
I've heard a lot about how to buy an airplane, but why should I buy an airplane? You even said that it's cheaper to rent for most people.
Yeah,
so-
flexibility, living the dream. It is, yeah, unless you're buying like a 152 or a 172 to offset the cost of like primary flight training. So you have guaranteed you're going to be putting 60 or more hours on this plane because you're getting your license. Guaranteed, like it's going to be cheap and you're going to find a seller or a buyer when you're done with it because it's a 172 and everybody wants a 172. Situation like that, you'll probably save money versus renting. Other than that, probably most likely not. The only reason I would buy in that point is to tell people you own a plane, to have the flexibility to take it on long trips wherever you want without having to beg mom and dad, to use the family car, and to like. What was I going to say? To own something that you can't really rent. Like this plane, like I mentioned, it's got built-in oxygen, it's got a turbocharger. It's a capable plane. It's hard to find something like that for rental. Most of what people rent are planes that can't comfortably go, like places this plane can go.
What about a partnership with flight schools where,
Like a leaseback agreement?
yeah, where you're sort of sharing the ownership and they're renting it out to defray the cost of maintenance? And
I
stuff?
would see that. Yeah, I would see that less as ownership and more as a business opportunity. Because first of all, you're going to have a lot of people touching your plane. So if you have any sense of, if you want to have any sense of ownership in your plane, it's a lot harder to do that, especially if it's a 172. So there's going to be student pilots landing it over and over and over again.
Overspeeding the flaps.
Yeah, exactly.
Not that I've ever done
That makes me
It's too
nervous
flat.
because you're like one bad student away from being financially ruined for that year on your lease back. Like one starter motor burn up $5,000, there goes all your profit for that year.
But I mean, I have friends who buy 172s by the truckload and lease them back. So as a business opportunity, it can be something, and you get some benefits, like you can kick people off the
first. And see how it goes.
you can kick people off the schedule to use your plane or something like that if you want. But if you want a real sense of ownership, like a plane that you own and take care of and like you keep to your standards, lease back is not the way to do that.
Well, one number I was given was 200 hours a year is kind of the break-even point or so. If you fly 200 hours a year, which none of us likely would, then it might be about even to own versus the actual asset cost notwithstanding as far as operation costs. But my motivation, like to lease a plane back to West Valley, is so that I can go on multi-day trips and not have to pay the daily minimums, because that's what really kills me. If I want to fly down to LA to see my brother and I'm only putting 5 hours maybe of engine time on, then it sits there for 4 days, then I'm getting dinged 3 hours a day for weekends.
If you're
That's a
frustrated,
big reason for
if you're frustrated with the rules of renting, like having to get permission to go out of state or on overnight trips, having to get permission to fly for more than 2 hours if you are a member of California Airways, where apparently you have to get permission if you want to fly for more than 2 hours, stuff like that. If you get frustrated with stuff like that, then owning might be better.
Otherwise, it makes no sense.
You mentioned that it might make sense from a training perspective. How do you buy a plane if you can't fly a plane? That's the scenario that I'm in.
I don't know. I have not done it, but lots of people have.
Well, you don't have to fly it to buy it.
You just need cash.
Yeah.
Sorry. How
If
do
you don't
how
know
do
anything about it.
How do you wisely do so, and how do you get it to wherever it is that you're going to train?
Yeah, the challenge is insurance. I've had a lot of conversations with about insurance about that very question.
Okay.
And basically, the rate you get charged is based on your credentials as a pilot at that time. And it's very hard to get an insurance policy as a student pilot. And even if there are provisos that say I can't even solo in it, for example, I only have to do it with my CFI, they still charge a lot more based on the credentials of the pilot.
And you may have to ask your CFI to help you, with understanding what the pre-buy inspection says and understanding, somebody, you may have to ask a CFI to can you help me understand if this airplane is worth owning?
My takeaway from doing that recently was just wait till I have my private before I actually write the insurance policy. Wait till I actually have my certification.
And if you're going into a fractional co-ownership, the other guys might not even want a student to be part of the crew. That was the situation I was in. I wanted to jump on a deal, but they required a 250-hour minimum hour flight time. So
Yeah. I would probably recommend owning just by yourself or with another student who's
Yeah.
also at the same level you are. If you're going to do that.
right.
That's interesting.
So speaking of cost and insurance, I've heard that if you're commercially rated, you get a discount.
Yes.
Is
If
that-
you have your instrument, you get a discount. If you have a commercial, you get a discount.
So
The more hours
three
you
of
have, basically.
those, or
I have my commercial. The rest of us have instruments.
Yeah, we all had instrument ratings.
Yeah.
We bought it.
But it was still expensive.
so is it some fractional percentage thing? You get a slight discount. But then
No, the only thing I got was easier requirements until I could solo it. I think Todd and Mark both had to put in 5 hours or something before they could solo it. I just needed to check out. but it's like our combined experience together is what determines the cost of insurance, and our insurance is expensive, and that's because we all had no service time, and
So
that's what
when
really
you say you're
mattered.
buying, is that like least common denominator, or is it?
Honestly, I don't know.
Yeah, and that's one reason why choosing your co-owners can be tricky. Like, it worked out really well for us because we're all pretty similarly experienced or within the same major bucket category.
Yeah.
But yeah, you'll have to work that out with your potential co-owners, and it could be tricky.
And our insurance is still $4,100 a year. Like, it's not cheap.
Yeah.
Is
It's,
that wrong
it's
for
probably
you?
best if
Yeah.
you don't care that much about like complete equability that way.
Right.
Like if you're willing to like let some things go, and
Yeah.
Tim charitably let us go without commercial ratings.
I didn't put them in
Didn't like
gunpoint.
put us through the ringer.
Yeah.
One data point.
Like that's
is
the
that-
wrong foot to set out on your partnership journey.
Well, the quotes I got were roughly $1,000 for 3 months because I was looking at potentially buying and then keeping it to myself for a few months before I have to share it with anyone, and then putting it on the West Valley line. And during that time, I'd have to buy my own insurance. And it was around $1,000 for 3 months, so figure out $3,000 a year.
Yeah. And honestly, if you guys are fighting over insurance, you're so much further along than everyone else I see who just they fall apart when they fight about which plane to own. Like most airplane ownership groups just fall apart because they can't agree on whether to own a Bonanza or a Cirrus or something like that. Like they're the same. They're the same plane. All right.